Welcome to the Beat Sessions, your place for all things music. I'm your host, Mitchell Weary. Let's talk about Chevelle and their record, Bright as Blasphemy. They released that on August 15th. This is the 10th studio album for the duo and their follow-up to 2021's Neuratius, an intriguing and ambitious album that is well executed and which marked a number of turning points for this band. Chevelle has spent much of their career exploring the iniquities of mankind, but Neuratius was the first time for them to do all of that within the framework of a concept album, one that examines political turmoil and social unrest in a futuristic dystopia, combining interstellar travel with a critique of real-world leadership. And I think the band was largely successful with their most experimental effort to date, creating a succinct universe where the dark realities of the modern world find a foothold in the listener's psyche. Bright as Blasphemy is a record that continues to build on these themes and this perspective, albeit without the sci-fi appeal. The album's second single, Jim Jones' Cowards Part 2, contains the line, "When the leaders don't drink from it first, the brainwashed have lost," capturing the essence of what is driving them now, confronting a real world where humans and computers alike work to obfuscate the truth. Neuratius was the band's first album as a two-piece after the departure of bassist Dean Bernardini, and Bright as Blasphemy witnesses the continuation of this dynamic that has its advantages and its downsides. It's the band's first album with Alchemy Recordings, a new label founded by Danny Wimmer and Dino Paredes that they signed with last summer after spending a long time being screwed by Epic. The goal in this pursuit was to create more independence with the creative process. And while this new record has many positive qualities, it doesn't really feel like the brothers took full advantage of their newfound freedom, especially when one considers the adventurous singularity of Neuratius. They've spent the better part of 30 years now carving out a relatively unique niche in the world of rock and roll. And while later records demonstrate a fine-tuning of their sound, ultimately it's rare to see them take big steps outside of their comfort zone. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I made this point recently when talking about the Black Keys. One could argue that Chevelle has experimented to a fair degree with the foundation of their sound throughout their career, but in my opinion, rarely has it been dramatic enough to keep their songs from sounding somewhat formulaic. For better or for worse, this is the MO for this band, and it's ultimately up to the listener to decide if consistency is prized more than experimentation. Bright as Blasphemy features loads of big chugging riffs, pounding drums, colossal vocal melodies, and explosive moments that are complemented by segments of hushed tranquility, among many other elements that characterize their music. It's a record that is not wholly adventurous, but it still delivers the goods. I think another fair criticism is the effect that Dean Bernardini's absence continues to have. His vigorous bass work is one of my favorite aspects of the records that feature his contributions. And I would say that the big turn in style with Neuratius did help to mitigate his absence, with Pete filling those shoes to a satisfactory degree, but Bright as Blasphemy suffers a bit because it's kind of a return to their conventional stylings without the gusto that Dean brought to records like Hats Off to the Bull and The North Corridor. Kind of reminds me of when Paul Banks took over bass duties for Interpol. That band continues to write solid music, but there's no denying that Carlos D's contributions to the band's early work is a massive part of what gives those records perennial status. On Bright as Blasphemy, Pete works the bass on 3 of the 9 tracks, but the majority of these songs were performed by new touring bassist Kemba Walters, who also engineered the record. Walters is a really talented guy who wears many hats and has worked with a ton of bands. But ultimately, I have my reservations as to whether or not he's the right guy for this outfit. And it's ultimately down the future to decide. In their quest for artistic autonomy, the band also opted to move forward without longtime collaborator Joe Barresi, who produced the band's last 4 records and actually suggested that the band produce this album by themselves. I'm all for bands mixing things up in this regard, as I believe it's one of the big steps that artists can take towards creative growth and freedom. But Joe was the guy that not only helped the band fine-tune their sound through the previous decade, he was also the guy that assisted them in taking that next step with Neuratius. With his influence, the trajectory of this band seemed very promising. In the process of continuing to branch out into exciting and unexpected territory. But I can't help but feel that Bright as Blasphemy has stymied this process to a degree. This album, it kicks off with the track Pale Horses. This one comes out screaming with a wall of heavy guitars and massive, formidable drums at a sludgy, torpid mid-tempo pace. The layers of guitar back off when the vocals hit, but re-emerge with the gaps in between lines, and a grinding bass line that materializes as an abrupt bridge. The chorus doubles down on the sludginess of this track, with the drums controlling the pace and big chugging guitars to boot. Second verse features a number of variations in the guitar play, and there's just a lot going on that makes this song fun. At the 2-minute and 30-second mark, just about everything evaporates, focusing on a single guitar and some vocals, with fluttering synths and cymbal play that floats in the ether. An intense turn in the vocals ushers the song back into a heavy bridge that leads into a final chorus that utilizes the lines from the first and second choruses in combination. Your second track is entitled Rabbit Hole, Cowards Part 1. Opens with a single grinding guitar riff that plays for a few bars until vocals steal the stage with the addition of drums. The first verse remains minimal as it progresses, with just those 3 elements carrying the track, with the exception of staccato eruptions that include bass and additional guitar layers. The chorus shifts into legato form behind big soaring vocal hooks and ends with a bridge that features the opening lead riff. The track then moves through another cycle of the verse and chorus, leading into a bridge driven by the bass drum, vocals, and subdued guitar play. After a few bars, the guitars come in heavy to finish the bridge in instrumental fashion, and then the final chorus begins with just guitar and vocals, and then balloons into a massive wall of sound to finish this one out. Your third track is entitled Jim Jones, Cowards Part 2. If you're not familiar with Jim Jones, he was the asshole that convinced about 1,000 of his followers to kill themselves and their children by drinking cyanide-laced Kool-Aid in 1978. It's another track that hits hard and heavy immediately, with titanic chugging riff work. The first verse opens briefly in minimal fashion, with just guitar and vocals, but quickly moves to incorporate the rhythmic elements. The riff here is great. It works with a big chugging shuffle that's muted to a degree and is kind of funky as well. There's a brief moment of just piercing vocals, guitar, and a cymbal count that open up a chorus that doesn't hold back on the heaviness whatsoever. The track features a number of these moments where the rhythm drops briefly before returning. And then the second chorus leads into a staccato-driven middle 8 with wild guitar play before returning to the chorus that features the screaming vocal Cowards. The coda begins with a shift in the guitar play that borders on tremolo. I really like the work here, before shifting into big chugging guitars and the refrain Brainwashing to close this one out. Your fourth track is entitled Hallucinations. This one begins with a little groove echo and a mid-tempo reverb-soaked guitar riff. It's a moment of respite that comes at the perfect time after just basically getting pummeled by the first 3 tracks. Vocals enter in placid fashion to match the mood of this one, and at about the minute and 15-second mark, the chorus provides a gentle burst of percussion with hollow lo-fi production and simple bass that builds to a brief swell around the lyric, "Yes, freedom exists," before subsiding and easing into a short bridge that leads into the next verse. The drums continue to shuffle along with the bass, finding a playful leg, And then the second chorus features fuller instrumentation that builds into a coda with heavy momentum and fades out with shuffling guitar and drums that slow in unison. I really like the way that this one fades out with the instrumentation. Your fifth track is entitled Wolves, Love and Light. Takes us back into the fray with a big chugging riff, drums working sparsely, leading to heavy staccato crashes, and finally unveiling what is, I think, the heaviest track on this record, with sharp guitars and the repeated lyric, Trust, accompanying the music. The first verse begins with a shift in tone on the guitars that matches the thick chugging bass and vocals that just pierce your ears. There's a brief staccato bridge that leads into the chorus that plays off the feel of the intro. And then the second verse includes the addition of searing, droning guitar and works into the next chorus in similar fashion. The solo is interesting, with the layers of guitar disappearing once again to highlight a fluttering riff that works minimally over the rhythm. And then the rhythm just drops momentarily to lead into the coda, working back with staccato crashes and finishing in massive form with a few final staccato crashes and a whispered vocal. This one honestly kind of borders on metal, and I really love what the band is doing with this track. Karma Goddess is your sixth song, a searing two-note guitar riff that opens up and a crack that just quickly punches with a grungy, sludgy metal influence. The verse hits with the rhythmic elements coming into prominence, while the guitar plays in unison for added texture. The chorus is marked by a return to the stylings of the intro, with vocals delivered in an unhinged manner. There's a brief and rapid chugging bridge that takes us into the next verse, that reverts into lighter alternative metal mood that also features some tremolo guitar play. The track plays into a solo that starts with a chugging rhythm and evolves into this proggy laser-like lead, ending with a shift back into the rhythmic structure and the hook, Trust us, simply trust us. I love that line. The chorus is featured once more to finish this track out, leading into your seventh song, Blood Out in the Fields. And this one changes things up brilliantly as well, with a steely lead riff drenched in reverb that channels a combination of like Latin and Parisian influences. It's really unique. Vocals work in subtly, a balanced high-pitched tone in a hushed delivery. The song remains minimal with gentle harmonies, and then the chorus finds the momentum building on the rhythm guitar and a hook taken from the title, an undulating synth element that almost kind of sounds like an oboe. It's really fun. There's another cycle of verse, chorus before the song transitions into an ominous solo that kind of sounds like a violin, driven by acoustic rhythm and warlike drums. There's a unique percussive element that kind of sounds like marching footsteps that appears as the track draws to a close and leads into your penultimate song. Number 8 is AI Phobias. This track is a banger. It is definitely my favorite. Fades in with cymbals that quickly shift into driving percussion, fuzzy synth guitar play, and restrained vocals. The percussive elements continue to build with a brief staccato segment that leads us into the chorus that begins with this sinewy guitar riff that shifts into big, heavier territory with the vocal hook AI Phobias. That's delivered with an obscured chanting. The second verse is sculpted with a muted, shuffling guitar lick and soon ditches the muted quality in favor of more pronounced guitar production. The track slows once more in the staccato fashion to enter the chorus, and then a guitar solo takes the lead just before the 2-minute and 30-second mark, concluding with a drop of the music before re-emerging at mid-tempo for a few bars and then shifting into an up-tempo pace to close on the AI Phobias hook. And then your final track, number 9, is Shocked at the End of the World. Begins with the sound of fluttering feedback before the vocals enter and introduce a scorching guitar riff. The track stays minimal for a few bars before exploding into fast-paced, hard-rocking thriller. The verse slows things to mid-tempo with chugging staccato rhythm, and then the transition into the chorus is marked by a return to minimalism, a fast-paced guitar riff with just vocals and cymbals that eventually burst with all the instrumentation. There's a back and forth between the mid and up-tempo segments as this track progresses, and then a fluttering riff shifts the song into sludgy terrain with a thrash metal riff that surfaces to close out on the hook, "They sold us war." A solid effort from these guys. Again, I think the major point that I'm trying to make on this review is that while it's not a record that finds them being as adventurous as they have been in the past, especially with Neurodius, to a degree, they have fine-tuned their sound a little bit. It's a process that just continues as they can, keep putting out records. But I do feel like just with the excitement that came along with their last record, the proggy nature of that album, really bearing witness to this band doing something more different than they ever have before, this record does kind of let down to that degree. I feel like they have so much potential to really open up their sound and to get so much more adventurous with it. But I will say that within these compositions, there's lots of fun instrumental play that does keep the listener on the edge of their seat. You never really know quite what's coming, and the layers that continue to build and develop throughout these tracks make them compelling and make them exciting. And it is a record that, you can put right along all of their best stuff. I don't think this is a band that has really ever made a bad record, but I look forward down the road to seeing them dip back into that Neurodius territory and potentially making what could be a great record. I'm going to give this album a 6.8 out of 10. I'm kind of in vinyl purgatory on this one. I'm not really sure if it's one that I'm willing to spend the money on, if it's going to hit the turntable that much, but I do think with more listens, this has the potential to grow on every individual, and I could probably see myself down the road throwing this in the shelf alongside some of their other records that really have held up very well. This is a band that, it's weird, for 30 years they haven't been the most relevant outfit out there, but they've never drifted into that territory of irrelevance. And to a degree, you kind of have to applaud them for that, for just committing to doing what they want and making the music that they love. So I hope you enjoyed this record. I hope you find this review helpful as well. Please like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, do all the things to help me blow this project up in 2025, and stay tuned throughout the week for more album reviews. We will see you next time on the Beat Sessions.